Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Gaming.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. Speaking of the past 24 or so hours, it is now the first day of 2018 as of the time I'm recording this, so Happy New Year to everyone. What did everyone get up to in their New Year's? With all of that said, let's talk about the news that we're going to be discussing in this very video. We'll start things out with Nvidia because the company have decided to prohibit the use of GeForce GPUs in data centers. Then we'll move over to AMD because the company are refusing to fix certain DirectX 9 games, blaming the fact that the API is old and now they simply don't want to push resources onto these older titles. And then finally, we'll finish off on a lighter note, which is Miyamoto, specifically on his philosophies on choosing game designers and game design as a whole, plus as well some Switch news as well. I'm going to start things out with Nvidia. I wasn't actually going to cover this at first. I did spot this a few days ago, but I kind of let it go under the radar and decided not to cover it. But then a couple of people decided over the past few days to email me this and ask my opinion of it. So, well, here we are, a couple of days late, but still. So this primarily comes down to the fact that there is a change in the ULA, which is of course the end user license agreement, which prohibits GeForce graphics cards in AI and deep learning applications, which are for non-personal data center usage. I'll read it out, it's pretty brief. No data center deployment. The software is not licensed for data center deployment, except that blockchain processing in a data center is permitted. So what does this really mean? Well, pretty simple, and I have a feeling that this may upset certain companies because, at the end of the day, this is actually going to probably affect certain companies quite substantially. Obviously, at the end of the day, GeForce graphics cards are for gaming. Of course, there are a few exceptions here or there. For example, the Titan lineup, of course, borders between the professional end of users and the more gaming-orientated side of things, which is one of the reasons it's typically called prosumer. The argument against that, of course, would be like the Titan XPs, which didn't have the FP 64 performance that you would probably have expected of like the older Titans. But regardless, primarily GeForce is aimed at gaming, and then you have other cards, for example, the Quadros or whatever, that are aimed at professional usage. Essentially, Nvidia here are obviously concerned that the research and development costs for the professional side of things is being outweighed by the fact that a lot of data centers are just using GeForce cards. Now, there are a couple of theories I have regarding the blockchain processing, which of course is for like mining, that type of thing, for like, you know, Bitcoin. But the biggest reason I can think of, and feel free to speculate on this, is that Nvidia haven't specifically really pushed the mining side of things. AMD semi have done it. I mean, you can argue that AMD's foray into tweaking the drivers specifically to improve mining performance, but Nvidia haven't really done that. And yes, there are a couple of mining orientated focused cards, but it's not really a great deal of R&D into it, so that's one of the reasons that they probably haven't really pushed it. At the end of the day, if you're a user which is at home, who for example is running virtual machine, whatever, let's say VirtualBox, and you're of course using a couple of virtual machines on your host system, and they're doing a couple of bits and pieces, for example you're doing development work, Nvidia are not really going to go after you. Once again, it's more personal use, and even if you're doing it for perhaps a little bit of development work, they're probably not going to be going after you, let's just be honest. However, if you're a large data center and your offerings are primarily, the GeForce lineup for, let's say, graphics processing, neural networks, that type of thing, then Nvidia may be a little more upset. The only downside for this for Nvidia is this would, of course, affect Titan V, but that already had a very niche market anywho. But the downside to everyone else is it could possibly increase data center costs. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if certain data centers, and I won't mention any names, but you can certainly do the Googling yourself. I wouldn't be surprised if certain data centers and their clients are kind of squirming in their seats right now, because essentially Nvidia could sue them and could basically be facing lawsuits from Nvidia. And obviously, if you've built your infrastructure around this, and presumably as well, let's say that you've been developing an application to run on those servers. They may not be your own, that you might be provisioning a set number of servers from a specific company. Then presumably you may have also done some architectural tweaking for those servers. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out. It might just cost a few $100 for smaller deployments, or it could cost about hundreds of thousands. And I wouldn't be surprised if certain smaller companies may be affected more by this, because if they are provisioning servers from large data centers, or perhaps have built their own data centers around these cards, because obviously at the end of the day, GeForce cards are typically cheaper, well, it's going to be interesting to see how the market reacts. Speaking of how the market reacts, this one is causing some controversy, and I'm going to try to remain neutral on this one. So, there is a bug which has appeared in the Radeon Software Adrenalin edition, which is 17.12. I am trying to do a full rundown of that driver, but I had a couple of issues actually with one of the capture rigs that I'm using, so I lost some of the footage for it, so I have to recapture it. It's been a whole thing. But anyway, DirectX 9, as you probably know, hasn't really been a thing for, well, about 10 years, probably a bit longer. But some AMD Radeon users have taken to Reddit. Now, of course, for those who are following along with computer news at all, you probably are aware that Steam sales are a thing. And let's face it, it's not just Steam. You've got Green Man Gaming, Humble Bundle, GOG, Amazon. It's basically impossible, whether you're a PC gamer or, to be fair, even a PlayStation or Xbox or Switch gamer, to run into any store and not see ridiculous bargains at the moment. And of course, that also includes cheaper games. And let's face it, a lot of people may not have been PC gamers back in the day, as PC gaming has become considerably easier. And I was actually somewhat ironically discussing this very point with Neil Trevor from Nvidia. He said one of the reasons that he believes that, and Nvidia as well, he was speaking from Nvidia's point of view, that gamers now are really starting to flock towards the PC as a platform, is because it's becoming so much easier. Back in the day, of course, consoles didn't need to update. Like the PlayStation 2, for example, the original Xbox, there was no real game updates. I mean, sure, with the Xbox, there were map packs you could buy for like Halo, that type of thing, but even back in the Xbox 360 era, especially in the beginning, there weren't that many updates. I mean, sure, there were the occasional one, but nowhere near as prolific as now. With the PC, you still have to do the updates, but it's all taken care of with Steam. Driver updates as well, it's pretty easy. Basically, it's just becoming a lot easier for people to kind of just jump in. And one of the really beautiful things about Humble Bundle, Steam, so on and so on and so on, is that it makes it easier to run those older games. For example, you can download Doom from Steam, and of course it will run through like DOSBox or whatever. And sometimes the configuration isn't brilliant, and you can certainly tweak it yourself if you're, that way inclined. But for most people, it will just run back, pew, 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 I've shot a demon, profit. So that means that new gamers are starting to move towards PC. And of course, a lot of those gamers will have undoubtedly gone towards, AMD as a graphics solution, which is fine. The problem is that the Software Adrenalin edition, which is 17.12, has a whole bunch of new features. The issue is that there's also new bugs. And these specifically not target as in maliciously, of course, DirectX 9. Now, the users took to Reddit, and AMD have responded on the official support forums, and they've said that they are unlikely to devote any valuable engineering resources to this issue. And in fact, the full statement is just a few words more. It says that these titles are from 2007 or whatever, so we are unlikely to devote any valuable engineering resources to these issues, which is most likely caused by outdated API modules. Not brilliant, I admit, but if you look at the games which are affected, they are pretty popular. For one, you've got Command & Conquer 3, Tiberium Wars, Kane's Wrath, plus a whole bunch of other Command & Conquer titles. Battle for Middle-earth 1 and 2, as well as The Witcher Enhanced Edition. Now, maybe a lot of people probably won't jump into like Command & Conquer, I'll grant you. But when you talk about like Middle-earth 1 and 2 and The Witcher, I could certainly see people getting upset about The Witcher 3. The Witcher, because, you know, if you're wanting to play the entire story, logically, you may have played Witcher 3 because there was like a massive, you know, marketing campaign around it, and plus as well, it was a pretty bloody good game. So people might have then retrospectively said, hey, The Witcher, I'll buy number 1 and 2 and then play them. Now, it, of course, is fine with Witcher 2, but The Witcher Enhanced Edition, not so much. Now, there is, of course, a really easy way around this, and that is that you could install older drivers. Some people are also saying that you might be able to tweak the files or whatever to get it working. However, as of the time I'm recording this, because this issue is still kind of new, it looks like, you know, not all games are affected by it, so we'll have to kind of wait and see. And AMD have actually locked the thread because there is, quote, nothing more to add. Now, I'm somewhat 50-50 because, let's face it, Command & Conquer not exactly popular. According to the thread that I'm reading on Reddit, so I'm going to credit the individual who is Sabby59, I'm hopefully pronounced his username correctly. His numbers are around, you know, just under 2,000 on The Witcher on Steam, and Command & Conquer series have about 1,500 players, and this does not, of course, include GOG and Origin. And to be clear, this is not just an issue with, say, the graphical bug where, I don't know, something's not rendering correctly, or perhaps occasionally you might get a character that disappears, or perhaps their face is a little messed up or something like that. No, the game literally does not start up. It just crashes and starts up, so you can't even enjoy it. So as of now, the best option is to basically run an older version, whatever you are happy with running, of the Radeon driver software. And that obviously is a pretty simple fix. Now, the reason I'm 50-50 on this is that I do appreciate users are very unhappy. I'm putting that mildly because at the end of the day, if you've just bought a game, you don't want to then have to worry about the software update. You know, it's a pain in the ass, essentially, changing your drivers. I'm not saying it's a hard thing. At the end of the day, it's just double clicking and exit clicking next a couple of times, waiting for your system to reboot, and that's it. But still, it's 5 or 10 minutes out of your life, especially if you have to then, you know, download an older version of the driver because you may have just deleted the local install and all of that stuff, and it's still a pain in the butt. And then, of course, you're probably going to want to update to the latest one for the best performance and or feature set. So, you know, that's just annoying. Especially because certain games, of course, let's fast forward. Let's say September this year. So, you know, fast forwarding several months into the future. Inevitably, there's going to be a game which is released that if you're running the older version of an AMD driver or an Nvidia driver, of course, it's the same thing, you're going to get a game which simply crashes on startup. I think it was Akami, actually. Amy was telling me was crashing on startup for her because she was running a very slightly older version of the driver. She updated, and of course, the game worked, no problem. And that inevitably is going to happen here. So if you've got a couple of games on the go, especially if one of them's like an online shooter or whatever, so that means it's not one of those titles where it's like, you know, you're trying to play like The Witcher at the same time as like Divinity Original Sin 2 or something like that. That would be absolutely a nightmare. But let's say you're playing like an online shooter with friends, and in the background you're playing The Witcher, you know, for your own personal amusement, that means you would have to keep switching the drivers, which would be an absolute pain. On the other hand, in AMD's defense, they do only have a certain number of people who they can allocate to certain projects. And at the end of the day, all companies have to kind of make decisions. But I don't think this is a particularly popular one. And I think what AMD should have done, given the whole situation, especially because it didn't help much that it says it's most likely caused by an outdated API module. I would have preferred, this is my personal opinion, I once again don't represent AMD, I would have preferred they say that we will, you know, look into this and we'll endeavour to correct it over the next several, you know, weeks or whatever. And of course, here's a temporary solution. I think that would have worked, or even if they could have released a patch or something. And, you know, I'm not particularly cut up, about Command & Conquer. I actually, ironically, do want to play through them again. It's been ages since I've played them. I don't think I even completed Kane's Wrath or Tiberium Twilight, but that's slightly beside the point. And Battle for Middle-earth, don't really have any love affair for that. But The Witcher I'd like to play through, because I've never actually played through the original or number 2. Actually, to be fair, I didn't even finish number 3. I'm probably getting slapped through the comments right now. But still, that does upset people. I kind of don't like it. And before anyone says that, an Nvidia fanboy, Nvidia have also made a whole bunch of screw-ups as well this year, which I've, criticised them on. And let's not also forget about the GTX 970. At the end of the day, all companies have issues. And I don't think that you should, do something like scream at, AMD in the forums that I'm, never buying AMD again and I'm going to buy a GeForce card, because that ultimately is not going to fix anything. However, do, of course, articulate if this is going to affect you. Say, hey, I would like a fix, or a patch or something. Someone to look into this. I'm sure at the end of the day they could probably hire 3 or 4 people to work on this for a short period of time if they had to. But obviously, I'm not exactly 100% certain how their driver revision process work. It might be, and once again, I'm making assumptions here because I don't know how their driver stack is created. But it might be that it would actually take a significant rewrite of this new Adrenalin driver for them to fix this. So I would like for them to kind of give a more in-depth explanation, I guess is really what I'm going with this. Anywho, this is getting far too long-winded, so let's move over to the final topic, and that is Miyamoto. I'm going to link the New York Times article because it is pretty comprehensive, and honestly, I don't want to, go through the entire thing, because I'll be here for another 25 minutes or something. But what is quite interesting is that Miyamoto has been fairly vocal of the Wii U's disappointing sales. For those who haven't been keeping up, but right now the Switch is pretty much decimating the Wii U, especially in terms of uptake. The Wii U, honestly, it was one of those consoles where every time I wanted to buy it, I just couldn't find myself justified to buy it. There were so many awesome looking games, like some of the Marios on it looked absolutely fantastic and all of this stuff, but I just kept thinking, I really want it. I want to get Mario up, I want to get Mario Kart, I want to play Zelda and all this stuff, but I know it's just not enough. Even little mistakes, like for example the gamepad situation, where you couldn't easily purchase, a controller separately and all that stuff. It was just kind of messy. So Miyamoto has said that it was difficult for customers to understand what the system was about, and it's true. When you look at the Switch, it's very easy. They've promoted it differently. They've obviously been really on top of their marketing. When I first saw the system kind of unveiled, it was obvious within about 2 seconds what was going on. And then obviously you saw it taken away out of the dock, and you saw them kind of playing it on the go, and they've done a really good job of marketing it. Whether, for example, it's like Skyrim and, you see the guy just, playing it in his hand or whatever, and then obviously it just plugs it in and just goes on the big TV. It's really easy to identify with that. Now, personally, I've actually got a Switch, as I've mentioned previously, and I'm enjoying it. Like, I own an Xbox One X, and I own a PS4 Pro, and I own a PC, which obvious, but still, I'll be really honest with you, most of the time at the moment, I'm actually playing a lot of Switch. I actually recently completed Mario Odyssey. Fantastic game. It really was absolutely excellent. And there are some stuff I still don't like about the Switch, honestly. I don't particularly like the standard controls. I think they're a bit clunky, even when you're putting them in the holders. I don't like that. I bought a Pro controller. I do understand the reason they've done that. Obviously, you can't, like glue a proper controller to the bottom of the Switch. That's just not going to work. And also, I do wish it was a little more powerful. I really wish they'd have gone with like a Pascal GPU and whatever. But obviously, pricing is also a problem. But I have to say, even on a fairly large 4K television, it looks quite nice. Games, they have a certain aesthetic, and Zelda, absolutely fun, absolutely amazing. In fact, it's one of the reasons I did not put out a top 10 list. I might actually do it a little bit later in the year, because I didn't feel that I played enough of a couple of games for me to put the list together. I feel like I need to play more of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I definitely feel like I need to play more of Xenoblade 2. I just don't feel that it's right for me to put the list out without having played them enough to really say anything. I would say, however, that Mario and a couple of other games would have gone on the list. Anyway, sorry, I'm being really off topic today. Anyway, he also said that one of the reasons that the Switch has been successful in his mind is that they combined all different play styles we've explored through our products in the past, and it's basically true. It feels very much like a obvious continuation of like the 3DS and the Game Boy lineup, but also you've got the ability to play docked mode, and that's really cool. But this is the quote that I found really interesting, and he believes that he has a unique approach when selecting new designers, game designers. I always look for designers who aren't super passionate game fans. I make it a point to ensure they're not just a gamer, but they have a lot of different interests and skill sets, end quote. And I do feel that's actually quite an interesting way of putting it, because most of the time people talk about how passionate they are about gaming and so on. But I think that Miyamoto, in his decision to do this at the end of the day, probably forces people to incorporate other things that they are expecting in real life and from other arts and media. And I do think that can kind of work. For example, look at the influences of Hideo Kojima, who one would argue is probably the most famous game designer of all time, or perhaps tied with Miyamoto. Anyway, sorry for being a bit rambly on this video. I don't know why, I'm just kind of like, I don't know, very chatty today. With all of that said, hopefully you have found this video informative or interesting or something or another. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.